Hey everybody, welcome back to another rainy episode of Facebook Live. We're here tonight at Sickles High School as the Griffins take on the Pinellas Park Patriots. And we are joined here today by a very special guest, sports medicine specialist, Dr. Adam Morse. Dr. Morse, how are you?
Very good, thanks. Glad to be here tonight.
Dr. Morse, we've talked a lot about leg injuries within sports medicine, primarily about ACLs and ACL tears. But tonight we wanted to delve into another common leg injury within sports, and that's hamstring injuries. So first off, Dr. Morse, what exactly are the hamstrings? What's its role within leg mobility?
So the hamstring are the posterior muscle groups in the thigh. They're across the back of your thigh from the back of your knee up to the back of your hip. They're responsible for straightening the hip out. So from going a sit position to a standing position, your hamstring fires along with your glutes. And then when you're running or moving, your hamstrings are responsible for bending the knee. So they're going to bend the knee, flex it up, and straighten the hip or extend the hip out.
And with those responsibilities, how important is it to maintain leg strength? More importantly, how important is it to maintain hamstring strength and flexibility?
So hamstring strength and flexibility are both critical to the athlete, especially if it's an athlete that does explosive activities. So a swimmer might not have to worry as much, or a cyclist might not have to worry about his hamstrings, but a soccer player, a football player, a baseball player, anybody that does explosive sprinting and running is going to need to make sure they maintain excellent strength and flexibility of their hamstring tendons. The hamstrings at high speed and high explosive activities reach maximum stretch and maximum pull, so that's going to require that if they're not in full strength and full flexibility prior to the onset of activity, there's going to be a much increased risk of injury. Therefore, warming up properly before you go out to practice and then keeping the legs warm while you're off the field is going to be critical to maintaining the health of your hamstring muscles.
And Dr. Morse, you said the word explosive a lot, and that's a big word. So what kind of injuries are you seeing with this explosion in the hamstrings? Are you seeing a lot of common hamstring injuries on a day-to-day?
So hamstring injuries are very common in athletes, especially in explosive sports, because of that sudden rapid contracture. If the contracture comes faster than the muscle or the resistance, if a running back is running into the offensive line and his hamstrings are exploding to extend the hip, and at the same time he gets hit and isn't allowed to continue to extend the hip, the hamstring is going to continue to contract, and you can either tear the muscle or you can stretch or possibly even tear the tendon away from the bone or tear a chunk of the bone off from the pelvis with a piece of tendon and the hamstring attached to it.
Wow. And with hamstring injuries, does having one hamstring injury leave you more susceptible or more vulnerable to having future hamstring injuries?
Absolutely. So the problem is that hamstring muscle especially is contractile tissue. It contracts and relaxes and contracts. So the problem is if you're tearing the hamstring muscle, it doesn't repair itself with muscle tissue. It repairs itself with scar tissue. So that section where that tear is, that glued itself together, doesn't have the same contractile properties as muscle. So as it scars in with cross links that don't line up and stretch with the fibers. So there's a real high risk of re-tearing mostly of the scar tissue, not necessarily the other muscle, but the re-injury is typically at the same location as the previous injury, right through the scar tissue.
And Dr. Morse, you said previously that the hamstrings help with other parts of the body, like the hips. It helps with hip mobility. So does injuring the hamstrings, could that possibly lead to injuries in other parts of the body as well?
Absolutely. Because the hamstring is involved in extending the back and in flexing the knee, if you have an injury to the hamstrings, it's not uncommon to have calf tightness for compensating for too tight of a hamstring. So then your calves will have to overcompensate and you can get a calf muscle tear. Even more commonly is if you're bending and lifting something up and your hamstrings are too tight, you're going to tend to bend at the waist and not use your hamstrings, so you're going to strain your back muscles, and it's very common to have low back tightness or a back injury in lieu of somebody who has a history of a hamstring injury.
And with all these injuries to the hamstrings, it seems like there's plenty to choose from. What does the treatment process overall look like? Is it usually non-surgical with rest and ice, or can surgical methods be, required if needed?
So on occasion, surgery is required, but the vast majority of hamstring injuries can be treated just as well without surgery. The problem with hamstring injuries is that the rehab is very long and slow, and people that get impatient, which is really common in athletes, will have a tendency to push too soon, too fast, and re-tear the hamstring. So the first thing that happens is the muscle bleeds, and then the scar tissue forms, and the scar tissue doesn't line up in the same direction as the muscle fibers, so it'll lie in kind of a lattice work, and we've got to slowly knead and stretch that tissue out to where it gets to be the same direction as the muscle tissue. Once we have full flexibility back, we can start working on full strength, and once we have full strength back, we can slowly progress back to explosive activities. Trying to skip steps is a frequent cause of recurrent injury and starting all over again back at the square one.
Dr. Morse, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for dedicating your time to our student athletes, our Sickles Griffins, and keeping them safe and protected from injuries. For the folks back home, thank you for tuning in. Keep staying tuned in, and we'll stay keeping you active. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.